This feels much like everything else we've done lately. Deja vu. We're back here looking. These are set 20 tapered bearings for this 9-inch that's in this thing. You guys have seen us do this once because this is the second set of these bearings that we've put on this axle. If we get in here and look, these bearings have 2,500 miles on them, maybe. And they are pretty much wore out. And if we look at the race, you can see, again, if I can get it to focus on it, you can see there's a distinct line there of wear and non-wear on that race. And then if we keep rotating it, boom, that line shifts to the other side of the race. So if that makes any sense, you got wear here, good here, rotate it. Rotate it, and now we've got wear here and good there. So basically what I'm saying is it's wrong, and we don't know why. And so we're gonna cut this thing off and I guess try this again. When we
fix it this time.
Yeah.
Find out what's going on.
When we load that, you guys remember we have that disc brake conversion kit. We got this is the bracket, this is the spacer, and that is the retainer plate. Laying here somewhere. Anyway, there's a retainer plate. Oh, it's right here. The retainer plate is right there. There's a spacer that goes between it and the axle housing, and then there's the bracket for the calipers mounts on the front of this. So all that is all sandwiched in there together. When you bolt this up, there is 0 axle in play. It completely locks everything down. So one thing we're thinking is this bearing has way too much preload, so it's just slammed in here. It's got everything locked down. On the other side of that, it might not have enough, and so this bearing's in here kind of like walking around inside the race, which would explain the shifting of the wear in the race. We don't know. We really don't know. These have definitely stumped us. If you go back, if you haven't watched us for a long time, or maybe you have, you'll remember we went through a whole process on this, and we really thought we had got these set up properly. And
talked to Strange.
Yeah, we called Strange. We called a lot of people. No one really knows like what that preload should be or has ever really measured it from what we've talked to them about. But man, those bearings, like I said, they have less than 2,500 miles on them, and you can see, or I hope that you can see, that they're pretty much shot. I mean, they're wore out, and it's just not a good deal. Not good.
At the end of this, we will be able to tell you what's going on. I'll know. We'll know. I promise you, we'll know what's going on with this thing. I'm tired of fooling.
This is, again, these bearings, the brake calipers, and the fuel tank are the 3 things we have worked on the most on this truck out of all the things, minus the random leaks that we had so many times. But like these 3 things, bearings, brake calipers, and fuel tank, have been a long topic of discussion here on the truck. Like I said, it's just a little exhausting, to be honest, and we don't know even where to do or where to start, but we're gonna start digging and see what we can figure out here.
Ready to catch that.
Okay.
So it's like,
I was thought I was. I got it. Second verse, same as the first. These bearings are also eat up. You can see, hopefully you can see there how eat up those are. And this race, very similar in that there's a wear pattern that also sort of moves around on the ring. You can see it's light here, hazy up here, and then when we rotate it, it kind of goes hazy across the whole surface. So what we're going to do, that one will also come off, but we're going to go ahead and just drop this whole axle housing out of here too. we're gonna pull the center section and check everything in there because we think everything's been loaded. We want to see what's happening with all of that. At this point, you might be saying, Mike, Jake, why take the rear end out of this thing? And here's the answer. The silver schmoo. And if you look here, you can see the streams coming from each axle tube. So that silver mess right there, that's why we took it apart. So it appears that everything in the center section is good. There's no excessive wear, there's not a ton of lash, there's nothing seems wrong there. So these bearings have just, as you guys know, are lubricated by the gear oil here in the rear end, and it's just drug all that trash from those bearings into the center section here. So if you look at in general, the rear end grease looks not bad because we literally it's got 1,700 miles on it, the Six Smokies trip, but there is a lot of sludge and stuff in there, so that's why we took this apart. Now we've got to clean this good, and we're going to double check and make sure everything's straight still. You guys remember us doing that? Again, a lot of deja vu this episode. We're going to do this, and then we will start going back the other direction, hopefully. This should look familiar. We have dropped the center section out, and if you guys watched us for a little while, before we left for Six Smokies, we took a hardened rod and some bushings, and we checked and made sure this thing was straight. We used a torch and we heated it, made sure that everything on it was square. We still feel fairly confident that it is square, but we put out a short yesterday, got a bunch of feedback, even from a guy who works at Mosier Engineering, and said, if those bearings are doing that, more than likely your axle housing is out of square. So we're building a new and improved axle fixture here, so that we can get a better idea and do a very even more detailed check, even though we really felt like we really did that. We have a few theories, probably 3 in general. First, axle housing's bent, potentially. Maybe the axles are too long for some reason, and that's causing some sort of binding because we get no in play on the axle at all, 0. Or 3, that silver shim that goes under the axle retainer is too thin or too thick, and that's either causing the bearings to not be loaded enough or to be loaded too much. Those are our 3 theories here. This video feels like it's kind of going off the rails because we're just having to kind of experiment and figure this out. But first, axle housing is bent. That's what we're working on now. We have this piece of 1.25 inch, I believe it was, 1 3/8 inch tubing. It is long enough to run all the way through this. Dad is building some bushings that will fit in here into the end of the axle. So you guys remember last time we had like a pointer that would let us identify where it was bent. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to have bushings that go into these axle housing ends. So when we run that rod through here, those will go up in here, and if they fit, we'll know that they're right. If that fits very snugly in there, he's going to make those exactly the same as what the race for the bearings is, so that if they fit in here and slide in, and we run those through bushings that are going to sit here inside of the carrier, then we know that that axle is square from the carrier out to the axle end. So we're going to do that on both sides, and like I said, that's long enough to run through both sides. So we're going to run one rod all the way through and then check the ends, and then that's going to be our starting point. If that's not it, then we have a whole other thing to investigate as far as that goes. We can investigate those shims over there, we can investigate axle length, stuff like that. But anyway, that's how it is. That's what we're doing. Again, feels like a little deja vu because we're doing all this again. But anyway, we did try and use our 3D printer here. We just felt these just weren't as exact as we wanted them to be. They do fit well. So like that guy right here, we initially were going to use that same 1 inch rod that we used for the first one. That fit very snugly in there, but this outer diameter is a little too small. You can see it goes in there, but it'll go in with the cap off. So there's just probably just a little bit too much. I probably could have made them just a little bit bigger in diameter and we would have been okay. But anyway, we just don't really trust the plastic at this point to check it. We want to use the metal rod and metal bushings. So now Dad got all these bushings made. This is snug into the carrier bearing position here, and this hole here is very snug on our piece of tubing here. So we are going to just kind of polish up this tubing a little, not polish it, but just clean it up and try and make it a little easier to put in. And then we'll set that in there with some shims to kind of replicate the gasket, which is actually something we didn't do before. That gasket's about 45 thousandths, so we'll put some washers in there that are really close to that and see if we can run this tube through, and we'll check our straightness of the axle housing. Alright, so there's our washers. That's setting the center section in there. Yep, and this is our extra center section that we have. We pulled the pinion support out of here so that we can get to everything. And we coated our tube here with some WD-40 to give us a little bit of lubrication. Now we'll see what we can do.
Don't worry about the one on this side.
Okay.
Just let it float over, and then we'll try to.
I mean, you can't get to it if you let it float over.
Okay, gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Hold on, hold on.
Has to be started pretty straight.
Look at it. Alright, Dad opened up those bushings 1,000, gave us enough to actually get it up on that tube now. So we're going to do this one more time, see if we can get this tube all the way through the axle housing. So we kicked that at the end. I was like, why is there so much play in that? There we go. It's very, very close, yeah. I thought that was longer than that too, but it's still okay though. Alright, so now with that tube through there, what our plan is use these. If they will start and go in those, that side is definitely square.
It's a little off center on this side.
This one's a little off.
Yep.
Alright, so this one side is a little bit off.
So maybe 6 feet off.
So you can see that right there. So you can see this won't go in here, and there's a little bit of a gap here. So we're doing the same thing we did with our indicator test, but this just gives you a way bigger visual of the whole area. But that side over there easily goes in. So this one is good. You can see that that just slides right in place there on that tube, and that tells us that this bearing is exactly in line with that bearing. That's why this tube's run all the way through these axles. So we do have a little bit on this side, but I have a hard time believing that's what killed that bearing.
Well, it's killed the bearing on both sides.
That's what I'm saying, so it doesn't make sense. So
yeah,
we do have some work to do here, but it's definitely not, I don't think that's our issue at the end of the day. Okay, we're gonna jump right back into the same process as we did last time. But you can see here, there's a gap right there. There's no gap here. So we're gonna want that. We're gonna heat it somewhere in this area. That'll let that shrink and pull this direction and close up our gap. At the end of this, we need these bushings to just slide right in like it's a bearing. I still don't think this is our issue. I really don't. But we'll find out. We'll look into that a little bit more after we get this straight, or while we're straightening this, and then we'll go from there. One thing we're not going to do this time, we're not going to quench it. We're just going to let this thing naturally cool down and see what we get. Mm-hmm. So I think you heard me say that this side was probably okay, but there is a little bit of gap on, if you look and see the tube inside of the bushing. So we're just going to try and get this thing, absolutely all of it, out of both sides.
He said he was on it.
There, that one heat up on this side just about has it straightened back up. So that's how close we were, really. And it's doing the same thing over here. This one's got to cool down and get it to where that tube will go into that bushing. We'll have this thing straightened up. Didn't go hardly enough on this side, so heating it up again. Gonna do it one more time.
I'm straight in line with that gap.
Kind of looks like it needs to be lower.
Lower?
Yeah. Right in there, yeah. Okay, we've got those bushings and carrier bearings and the axle bearings with the tube through all four of them. And right now, if Dad reaches in there, he can actually rotate that tube. So we know that that thing is extremely square. I mean, it's as close as you're going to get it unless you start putting mics on it. And even if you put a mic on it, I don't know how you get it any more square, to be honest with you. So we know this is square. It wasn't that far out. We were able to move it some. So that's some of it. I think I mentioned to you our number 2 thing that we were thinking it might be is that the shim here might be too thick or thin. But instead of the shim, we're actually going to check axle length. We have a wonder if those axles are not going into this carrier and bottoming out. We got these from Strange. We told them the dimensions of the axle housing and everything. They sent them with the tapered bearings on them and all of that. So like that's how these axles came. This is a different set of bearings, but they came with that exact same style bearing, this length and everything. We didn't cut these or anything like that. So we wonder if somehow these are not getting bottomed out or causing that. And that's why we can never get any in play out here at all whenever we tighten this thing up. So that's the next thing we're going to check and see is if these axles are actually bottoming out at all. We are back on this thing. We're trying to figure out, so we have the axle that doesn't have any bearings on it on this side, and we have the axle with the bearings still on it on this side. We added a second shim here. This is basically, so we're doubling the amount of shim that we have here, and with that you can see, and if we measured it, we have a 1/16 of movement on that axle. So it has it unloaded. The bearing is unloaded out of the race there, or it has the ability to be unloaded. If you take and measure this distance from the axle housing to the here, you get, with it pushed in, 1 7/8 inches. Now on this side, if this one doesn't have any bearing, which means there's nothing to keep it from going or from stopping out here other than what's going on in the center section here. And if we measure that, it is also 1 7/8 inches, which means that this, if a bearing was here, this could only physically go 1 7/8 inches into it. And we measured this one, you know, that one's 1 7/8 inches as well. And somewhere between 1 7/8 inches and 1 inch and 15/16 at some point there, it actually loads that bearing. So now we have two theories. One, which is what we discussed earlier, the axles are too long and they're just bottoming out in the center section. Or the other thing that it could potentially be is that there's not enough spline on the axle and we're actually bottoming the splines into the center section, so the actual axle shaft is hitting the splines in the center section. So we're going to have to pull the center section back out and figure out which one is it. And then we have to make a decision on what we're going to do to try and fix this to where we actually have load on these bearings and everything will load up how it's supposed to, and we can hopefully prevent that wavy pattern that we were seeing on the races. So we're definitely not running out of splines, so now we need to figure out if it's too long. I know this kind of keeps going, and it probably will never be able to see it with this camera, but you can actually see little dots of grease that have made it all the way back into that chamfer back there in the back, and you can actually see a little bit of discoloring. You can see that bronze color on that pin. Pretty sure that those have been riding on that. We feel confident enough now that we're planning on cutting about 1/8 of an inch off of these axles, both of them. And
I'm gonna go about 3/16.
Okay, 3/16. So he's gonna go 3/16 on them, and we're just gonna try it because we should still have plenty of engagement. Because if that's been riding on that, there's about 1/8 of an inch between the end of those, the splines in the center and the carrier there, and to that chamfer. So I mean, like, what we're taking away is what's actually already hitting. So yeah, we're not taking away any of our thread engagement there, or any of our spline engagement there. So we're just going to take it to where those are not riding on that. So we're going to take about 3/16 of an inch off of both of these, and we're just kind of biting the bullet and seeing what's right. So exactly. So we can actually load the bearing instead of the pin, and then we don't get that crazy wavy pattern, and this should all work. Alright, there are two axles roughly 1/8 inch shorter, between 1/8 and 3/16 shorter. So now we're ready to put it all back together again and see what we get here, and see if we can actually get that bearing, that one, to load up on the race. At that point, then we have to wait for some new bearings to get here in a couple days. Alright, so used to, if we held this seal even with our hands like this, there was zero play in this axle. But if you watch closely, this is without the plate on it, by the way. If you watch, it's very hard to do. You can see just a little bit of play in that where that was not hitting. They were just too long. So now let's put the retainer plate on and see how this thing acts once we torque it down a little. Okay.
These pads here actually lay against this end of the race right here, this end of the bearing right here. Those tabs sit.
Yeah, inside here against this.
Yeah, they sit. Well, you can see how this seal is, and it pushes against that, which actually provides it like a crush that makes this seal really tight around the axle flange.
We put this other spacer in here just to check and see how much preload we're getting, and we're getting about 25 thousandths of preload, if you will. So on our short that we put out the other day, everybody was asking, no, you can't properly preload them. You kind of can if your axles are long enough. So we now have preload on that, we believe and we hope, and now we're going to run this thing. But that's going to wrap us up for this week. We're going to see the final setup. You'll need to subscribe and come back whenever we finish this guy up and we go ahead and get it put back into the truck and we just see kind of how they do. This is another one of those, it's going to take some time to see how everything goes, but this one turns pretty freely now where it's not bound up like it was whenever we first took it apart. So we get some new bearings on this thing, it should be good. But that's going to wrap us up. Hit subscribe, go follow us on Facebook and Instagram and all those things, and you won't miss anything. Next thing you're probably going to see is us get the fuel tank put back in this thing with our strap system instead of it being bolted into the frame, so we can hopefully fix the leaking issues. So we're going to have a few episodes of kind of fixing the truck and getting it back rolling and ready to go before we jump back into the 55. But hopefully we'll be well into that here pretty soon. So we'll see you guys next week.